Shalom Aleichem Chevron, Guten Erev Shabbos Nachamu. This year, like every other year, for the close to 2,000 years that we've been in Galus, we experienced another Tisha B'Av, and it was a sad Tisha B'Av, and we sat on the floor, we read Eicha, we read Kinnis, we tried to feel the lack of Hashras HaShechina in whatever way we could, whether it was through reading the English of the Kinnis, listening to speeches, watching videos, but in some way to try to feel the chesaron that we have in the world that we live in a world without the Beis HaMikdash, without a clear Hashras HaShechina. And then comes Shabbos Nachamu, and there's a feeling of joy, a feeling of relief, a feeling of happiness which washes over Klal Yisrael. And we want to ensure that that feeling is coming from a real place, that that feeling is coming not because we're just happy that we can now finally have a barbecue, listen to music, wear fresh clothing, go swimming, and get on with our summers, quote unquote. We want to feel a feeling of a real Nachamu, a Nachamu from the Rabban Shem, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami, Yomer Lekechem. And the question is, how is a Yid supposed to feel a Nachamu? We cried about a lot of things on Tisha B'Av. We cried about a lot of tragedies. We cried about a lot of lacks in our life, a lot of chesroinus in our life. And all of those chesroinus are still here the day after Tisha B'Av. Nothing changed. All the sick people are still sick. All the dead people are still lo yoleinu and shemayim. All the tragedies are still tragedies. All the spiritual tragedies we cried about are still there. We still don't have clarity. We still have a lack of Hashras HaShechina. What changed? In what way is a Yid supposed to really feel a Nechama on this Shabbos? What way can we really feel comforted and really feel a sense of joy and happiness on Shabbos Nachamu? So the Sfarim HaKadoshim tell us that the word Nechama doesn't only mean comfort. Nachamu, Nachami, Ami doesn't only mean to be comforted, but it means something else as well. When we look at the first time that the word Nechama is mentioned in the Torah, Vayinachem Hashem, it's mentioned when the Rabban Shem Kaviyachal had regret over the creation of the world. The pasuk tells us at the end of Bereshis that the Rabban Shem looked around at the world and saw how terrible the people in the world were acting. Vayinachem, the Rabban Shem had regret and decided that maybe it was better to have not created the world. Say the Sfarim HaKadoshim, what's the connection between regret and comfort? There seem to be two totally opposite words. Say the Sfarim HaKadoshim, the word Nechama, that same shorish which means regret and comfort, means a change of perspective. Nechama means that a person's able to see something in a different way than they saw it before. But the Rabban Shem saw the creation of the world and the purpose of the world in a different light than Kaviyachal had seen it before. And when a person is comforted properly, a person is able to see things in a different way than they had seen things when they were in that place of tsar. Sometimes that means that a person has a loss, a person has a chesaron, somebody comes along and shares a new perspective and allows the person to see that that which they thought was a loss was a chesaron, is really the greatest mila. They weren't really missing anything. On the contrary, what they thought was a loss of a job was actually the greatest, opened up the doors for the greatest opportunities. Sometimes a change of perspective means that I realize I don't have a loss. I never had a loss in the first place. But there's another kind of nechama which takes place, which is also a change of perspective. When I recognize that I'm not alone in the morning. When a person chalila lost a parent, lost a sibling, lost a child, and is sitting avelis for that child, for that parent, for that sibling, and a person's sitting shiva, and their close friends come in to be menachem avol them. What the friends are doing, what the family is doing, is not being menachem them, not comforting them by telling them it wasn't really a loss. Of course, what you're dealing with is a tragic loss, something that we can never fathom. Yet by yenachim, a person's able to see and have a change of perspective by recognizing that I'm not alone in this tragedy. I'm not alone in this loss. There's a community, there's family and friends who are coming here to comfort me by allowing me to have a change of perspective and to recognize that I'm not alone in this tragedy. Zak the Heilige Kedushas Levi. You know what Shabbos Nachamu is? Shabbos Nachamu can be summed up in one word. Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. The word Ami. The Rabban Shem tells Klal Yisrael, I just want you to know, you sat for the past 2,000 years in Galus, you sat crying over the Churban Beis HaMikdash, you weren't alone. I sat there on the floor with you crying as well. The Rabban Shem was normally a Yoshev Tehilas Yisrael, sat on the floor and cried with Klal Yisrael, mourning the loss of the Beis HaMikdash and mourning what Klal Yisrael looks like in Galus and mourning the lack of the Beis HaMikdash in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore the Rabban Shem tells Klal Yisrael, Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. You're my Ami, you're my nation. After 2,000 years, I want you to know that I haven't forgotten about you. You haven't forgotten about me. You haven't forgotten about the way the world should look. And the Rosh Hashanah tells Klal Yisrael, I haven't either forgotten about you being my Ami, you being my special nation. And that itself, that change of perspective where we shift from thinking that we sat on the floor by ourselves on Tisha B'Av, that the Rabban Hashem, who was still Yeshiv Tehilas Yisrael, was sitting on the Kisei HaKavod and we sat on the floor. On Shabbos Nachamu, we get a change of perspective. We're able to see that things weren't the way we thought it was. We're able to have the Nachamu of recognize that the Rabban Hashem calls us Ami, that we're still called the Rabban Hashem's nation, that after 2,000 years in Galus, the Rabban Hashem is still waiting for us to come back. The Rabban Hashem is waiting day in, day out, begging and davening that Klal Yisrael does what we need to do in order to bring back Ashras HaShechina properly, to bring back the Beis HaMikdash. And that change of perspective, that feeling of not being alone in Galus, that feeling of the Rabban Hashem calling us Ami, Yomer Elikechem, He's our God, Zakti Kedushas Levi, that itself is the greatest Nachamu in the world. To know that we're not in the tragedy alone. We're not in the tsar alone. B'chol tzarasam lo yitzar. In every tragedy and every pain, every cry that we had over Tisha B'Av, every krechs that we gave over Tisha B'Av, the Rebbe Hashem felt it as well. And that feeling of not being alone in Galus already allows a person to go into Shabbos in a different way. The Rebbe Hashem should help us that we should feel that feeling of Nachamu, Nachamu, Ami. We should know what it means to be Ami, that the Rebbe Hashem is proud of us. The Rebbe Hashem is waiting for us. The Rebbe Hashem hasn't forgot about us. The Rebbe Hashem mourned with us. And the Mitzvah Hashem will be Zeicha, to have the Rebbe Hashem will be Misameach with us, the Binyan Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi, the Meher of Yemina.